He humiliated her, then found out she was the dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m. The sky was already dark, reflecting the sparse streetlights along the empty roads. It was just another night in the suburbs, quiet, humid, and stifling. Inside a black Honda Accord, a discreet model, Vivian Banks was driving home, her hair tied back, skin still glowing from an intense workout. On the car stereo, Kendrick Lamar and SZA were singing Luther, the beat pulsing gently, filling the silence between her thoughts. She sang along softly, more focused on the day's memories, the tense hearing that afternoon, an awkward comment from a fellow attorney, and the relief she'd felt sweating it all out on the treadmill. She was tired but at peace, calm. The light turned green, and she made a left onto the avenue near her residential neighborhood. That's when the blue and red lights began flashing in her rearview mirror. Vivian frowned, instinctively turned down the volume, and looked again. A police cruiser was right behind her, high beams on, emergency lights flashing. No other cars on the street. She calmly pulled over to the right, turned on her hazard lights, shut off the engine, and took a deep breath. "Okay," she muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. She hadn't done anything wrong, but her body knew what her mind was still trying to rationalize. A subtle tightness in her chest, the kind of reflex black bodies carry without formal training. Hands visible, still, resting on her thighs. She glanced at the passenger seat. Empty. No bag. Her stomach turned. "Damn it. My wallet," she whispered. She'd left it at the gym. The cruiser door shut with a sharp click. Steady footsteps approached. "I forgot my wallet in the locker room. This is my car. I can provide my name and information if you'd prefer." He raised an eyebrow. "No form of ID at all?" "I'm not refusing. I just realized. The gym is 3 blocks away. I can have someone bring it over if needed." He raised the flashlight and aimed it directly at her face. "Why are you driving without documentation, ma'am?" Vivian kept her tone even, clear. "An oversight, sir. Nothing more. I'm fully willing to cooperate. My name is Vivian Banks." No reaction, no note-taking. He simply stepped back. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "With all due respect, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" The light didn't move. Neither did he. Kevin Bernard was used to controlling interactions, not justifying them. "You drifted out of your lane, and now without ID I can't verify your identity. I understand. But I'm not a threat. I'm unarmed. I haven't been drinking, and I can confirm my identity quickly." He raised the radio. "Remain in the vehicle. A second unit is on the way. The car may be impounded." Vivian turned to face forward, exhaled slowly, carefully unbuckled her seatbelt. "Understood," she replied, tone still steady. She picked up her phone from the center console, unlocked it, opened the camera and started recording. Her hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from memory. "Officer, just for the record, I'm fully cooperating. This interaction is being recorded." He paused. And to Bernard, that meant he was still in control. 2 more officers approached. She raised her phone steadily, discreetly pointing it toward the group. "I'm being treated like a criminal for not carrying a driver's license, despite identifying myself verbally. I'm documenting this abuse of power should it occur." Kevin let out a mocking laugh, glancing at his colleagues like she was putting on a show. "You're creating a scene." She looked him directly in the eyes for the first time. "No. I'm creating a record." The tow truck arrived about 10 minutes later. No one spoke to her, no one touched her. But the car was taken, and that in itself said everything. She stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, phone still recording, her shoulders stiff, not from tension but from resolve. It was the final act left to her, to stay. The video wasn't for social media, it wasn't for sympathy, it was a record, a safeguard, a reminder, for the system, for the court, for anyone who needed to see clearly later. The cruiser pulled away first, then the tow truck. The sound of the engine fading into the distance left a kind of silence that hung heavy in the air, not dramatic, just tired. Vivian lowered her arm, ended the recording with a simple tap. The phone lingered in her fingers for a moment, still as she looked around. She knew that stretch of road well. She'd driven through there dozens of times, but now it felt like a new place, cold. The weight of the day finally caught up with her. It wasn't just about the car. It was about the accumulated exhaustion, the effort to stay composed, the way something so simple became a point of friction. She didn't cry, not because she didn't feel it, but because crying wouldn't change anything here. She needed to move forward, and she knew how to do that. She unlocked her phone and dialed a memorized number. "Hi, Angela. Sorry for the late call. I need a ride." That's all she said. 10 minutes later, Angela's car pulled up at the curb. Vivian got in and settled into the passenger seat, not rushing, not explaining right away. She just buckled up, looked out the window and said, "The car got towed." Angela glanced sideways, surprised. "What do you mean?" Vivian took a deep breath before answering. "I got pulled over, left my wallet at the gym. I explained, was polite, cooperated. But he decided that wasn't enough. Called for backup. They took the car." Angela nodded slowly, eyes on the road. "And you, are you okay?" "Yes, I filmed it. I stayed calm." She paused, looked down at her hand resting in her lap. "But sometimes it just wears you down, you know." She wasn't talking about fear, or even outrage. It was something deeper, a kind of silent erosion that builds up when the reasonable must be defended with so much effort. Angela took a few seconds before replying, then simply asked, "Did he know who you were?" Vivian shook her head. "No." Another moment of silence. And he didn't seem interested in finding out. She leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes for a few seconds. She didn't sleep, didn't shut down, just decompressed. Because even staying calm has a cost. Angela kept driving in silence, respecting her friend's space. The car moved through a city still awake, passing familiar signs and corners. No words were spoken until they arrived, and none were really needed. Title: Stop Report. April 17th, interaction with Officer Bernard. She typed without rushing but without stopping, included time, location, weather conditions, description of the stop, the officers involved, their words, gestures, tone of voice, details. She knew exactly how to document a violation. Vivian wasn't just a legal expert. She was a specialist in identifying patterns of institutional abuse, and she knew the strength of a case lies in the details and in the composure of the person making it. 40 minutes later, she finished the document. Read it twice, edited, saved it as a PDF. Then she attached the video, not just the one she'd filmed herself, but also downloaded the automatic recording from the cloud, encrypted backup included. The house was silent, just the distant hum of a fan spinning slowly. She picked up her phone and sent a short message to a contact saved as Dr. M. Noguera, DA's office. "Arbitrary police stop tonight. No violence, but abuse of power. Documented everything. Complaint filed. Will update you tomorrow." She turned off the lights and lay down, but didn't fall asleep right away. Kevin Bernard's face still echoed in her thoughts, his tone, his stance. More than anger, it was the cold, methodical indignation of someone watching the system fail where it was meant to protect. That night, Vivian wasn't just pulled over, she was treated as if she were invisible, and she decided that this time, no one would walk away unaccountable. The next day dawned heavy, the sky overcast and the streets still damp from the early morning drizzle. At the 12th District Precinct, the atmosphere was as usual. Weak coffee, broken conversation, and the constant scent of damp paper mixed with poorly regulated air conditioning. Kevin Bernard walked in at 7 a.m. sharp, as he had for the past 7 years. A dark, wrinkled suit jacket over his vest, eyes half closed, and the same expression of someone who believes the world owes him respect just for showing up. "Another night on the front lines," he muttered, tossing the cruiser keys onto his desk and stretching. In the back of the room, the sound of printers whirring and cell phones ringing created the typical background noise of a morning shift. His patrol partner, Officer Mendez, looked up from behind his computer screen. "How'd it go last night?" Kevin snorted. "A woman, uppity, coming back from the gym with no ID, tried to act like she was someone, started recording, dropping names. You know how it goes." Mendez raised an eyebrow, intrigued. dropping names. She spoke like she was important, but she was sweaty, in leggings, no wallet. I gave her the standard treatment, called for backup, and had the car towed. She'll learn next time. Another officer, Rodrigo Silva, overheard part of the exchange while pouring coffee into his mug. What was her name? Kevin hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. Vivian Banks. Silence. Rodrigo stopped stirring his coffee. He looked at Kevin like he'd just heard something terribly wrong. Wait, did you say Vivian Banks? Yeah. You sure? I'm sure. Why? Rodrigo put his mug down in the sink and stepped closer, arms crossed. Man, do you know who Vivian Banks is? Kevin laughed. Just another citizen who thinks she can outsmart a cop? No, Bernard. Rodrigo's tone was firm, no sarcasm. She's a civil court judge at the Central Courthouse. She gave a lecture here last year on abuse of authority and constitutional rights. The room seemed to shrink. Kevin froze for a moment, blinking like he needed the information repeated. A judge? A judge. And not just any judge. She's known for being serious, respected, tough, but fair. She's got contacts in the DA's office, the Public Defender's office, and the Ethics Council. And she, Kevin began, his voice nearly cracking. She didn't say that last night. Did you ask? Kevin scowled. He began pacing, agitated. She didn't formally identify herself. No license, no documents. She could have been anyone. Rodrigo said nothing. He just looked at him with the expression of someone who'd heard that excuse too many times. His silence hit harder than any lecture. Kevin turned away and went straight to the computer. He logged into the internal system and pulled up the incident report. There it was. Name of individual, Vivian Banks. Status, no documentation. Action taken, vehicle impounded. Stated reason, suspicious behavior and lack of identification. He read and reread it, trying to find some loophole that might shield him, some detail that would justify it. Nothing. Everything in the report sounded by the book, and at the same time, ridiculous. A notification popped up on the system, an internal alert. New complaint filed. Case number 2024, row 417, row 91. Potential abuse of authority. Involved officer, Bernard, Kevin, Internal Affairs Division. His face flushed. Rodrigo saw the screen over Kevin's shoulder. She didn't waste any time. No way, Kevin muttered, slamming the browser closed. Oh, it's real, and it's just the beginning. Before he could react, his phone buzzed. A brief message from leadership. Report to Captain Mura's office, immediately. The world Kevin thought he controlled started to crack right there, between the click of a mouse and the muffled hum of the printer. And he was finally beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, he had pulled over the one woman he shouldn't have. Across the city, as the name Vivian Banks began to echo through the precinct halls, the judge herself sat in her chambers at the district courthouse, formal attire, dark blazer. Hair pinned back with precision. In front of her, a stack of case files awaited review. Hearings were scheduled for the next few hours, legal opinions pending, and a report from the Judicial Conduct Commission on a malpractice case she had personally requested. The day was unfolding exactly as it should. But anyone paying close attention would have noticed something different. Vivian was more alert than usual, not tenser, just sharper, as if every word she read could carry long-term consequences. She finished reviewing a protective order, signed it with the same pen she'd used for years, a classic Parker, and pressed the intercom button. Melissa, please schedule a lunch with Prosecutor Lacerda, institutional matter. Yes, ma'am, replied her always punctual assistant. Vivian released the button and leaned back briefly in her chair. She took a deep breath. In front of her, no wall of diplomas, no flashy displays. Just shelves lined with legal literature, a small plant on the desk, and a single understated photo. Her and her parents on the day of her law school graduation, 3 decades ago. She never needed framed degrees to prove her competence. It showed in the outcomes, in her reputation, in the way colleagues lowered their voices when they entered her office. That morning, 3 internal notifications from the Judicial Conduct Oversight Board had already arrived. requests for additional details on the initial report. All procedures were in motion, videos attached, statements recorded, witnesses listed. But she knew the real process hadn't even begun. And by now, Kevin Bernard had likely learned who he had crossed paths with. The name Vivian Banks didn't go unnoticed for long. At exactly 1:10 p.m., Prosecutor Eduardo Lacerda walked into her office, briefcase under his arm, steady steps, direct expression, always to the point. "Vivian, I saw the report. Jed came through the internal channel this morning. Thanks for coming, please have a seat." He sat down without hesitation. "You planning to go through administrative channels only?" "No, we'll be filing a civil action as well." Lacerda nodded. No surprise. He had known Vivian for years. He knew when she made a decision, it wasn't on impulse. It was measured. "How far do you want to take this?" She looked him in the eye. "All the way." She paused, then continued clearly. "And it's not about me. It's about everyone who doesn't have a camera in their pocket, who doesn't have a last name that opens doors, who gets caught in a standard procedure and swallows their anger just to make it home in one piece." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "The video is clear, but even so, they'll claim protocol. Excessive caution. Lack of information. The usual script." Vivian didn't hesitate. Refusing to acknowledge who's in front of you is also a choice. That stop wasn't about safety. It was about control. Lacerda sighed. He knew that tone. It wasn't anger. It was surgical precision. Vivian was made of that. Analysis, action, and consequence. No spikes, no noise. The press will catch wind. It's only a matter of time. Someone at Internal Affairs will leak it. It'll hit local papers, then the political blogs, and then it's a national story. "I won't give interviews," she replied flatly. "This isn't about headlines, it's about case law. If I have to speak, it'll be in front of a judge or a jury." The prosecutor stood, smoothed his suit jacket, adjusted his briefcase. "Then we'll document everything carefully, build it like a model case." "That's exactly what I want," she said. "A clear precedent. Something to be cited, filed, that makes the next person think twice before repeating the pattern." Lacerda paused at the door, looked back. "Vivian, you're sure?" She simply returned his gaze. No smile, just certainty. "If I don't do this now, everything I've built loses meaning." He nodded and left. She remained. In the following minutes, Vivian compiled a visual sequence from the video recording. Frame by frame, the approach, the tone of voice, the moment backup arrived, the decision to tow, her behavior, his. She printed the frames on high-quality paper, organized them in labeled folders, file name, Banks versus. The app confirmed it would arrive in 2 minutes. Inside the car, through the rear window, she spotted a cruiser parked outside a diner on Jefferson Avenue. 2 officers sitting on the hood, laughing, one with his hand resting casually on his holster, as if it were second nature. She noticed, not because it was a threat, but because it was a pattern. Her phone vibrated, a text message, a colleague from the federal court, quick, direct, supportive. Saw the video, it made it here. "Whatever you need, I'm with you," Vivian replied with one word. "Thanks, more than enough." That night, as Officer Kevin Bernard sat at home, staring at the disciplinary report in his hands, eyes fixed on the words, conduct violation, internal review, possible suspension, Vivian had already closed her day, 2 steps ahead, with the calm of someone who knows the system from the inside, and the discipline of someone who's never had to raise her voice to make an impact. He thought the badge made him untouchable, but this time the court would not bow, and the system would listen. The next morning, Kevin Bernard arrived at the precinct with his usual posture, but not with the same weight in his step. His body moved with the routine of someone who still believed himself untouchable, but his mind had already begun to hesitate. As he entered the room, he noticed it was quieter than usual. Rodrigo, his longtime colleague, didn't joke with him. Mendez avoided eye contact. Even the civilian receptionist at the front desk, who usually asked if he wanted coffee, gave him nothing but a flat nod. He felt the isolation. It wasn't noise, it was absence. At his locker, he took off his jacket and approached his desk. Before sitting, he saw the brown envelope resting on his keyboard. No visible sender, just a label in bold black letters. Confidential, internal, use only. He opened it slowly. The contents were direct. Summons for preliminary hearing at Internal Affairs. Subject, unjustified stop. Banks, Vivian preliminary conduct review. Possible protocol violation. Kevin leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His brow furrowed, not from surprise but from discomfort. It was real now, official, unavoidable. Moments later, his phone rang. "Bernard," he answered with little energy. "This is Supervisor Jeanette Lemos. You have 30 minutes to report to room 4B. "Take a seat, Bernard," Jeanette said, unsmiling. He obeyed. Hands resting on his knees clenched into fists. "You know why you're here. I assume it's about the traffic stop the night before last." "Exactly. We have footage of the encounter. Yours and the individual stopped. Her name is publicly and legally known. As you're well aware now," she added, pausing for effect, "we're referring to Judge Vivian Banks." Kevin tried to reclaim a shred of control. "I didn't know who she was at the time." "That's not the issue, Sergeant," the advisor interjected. "The issue isn't the who, it's the how." A keyboard click, and the monitor behind them came to life. The footage played. The stop unfolded on screen. Vivian explaining, attempting to cooperate, remaining calm. Kevin shining the flashlight in her face, hand resting on his holster. His tone, his demeanor. The decision to call for backup without any real evidence of danger. The moment she says she's recording, and his attempt to stop her. The tow truck arriving, her car being taken. Kevin watched himself like a stranger and didn't like what he saw. Jeanette turned off the monitor. "Sergeant Bernard, Internal Affairs will now conduct a formal investigation into your conduct. Judge Banks's complaint has been validated through visual evidence and conflicting reports. Footage from your patrol car contradicts your official statement." Contradictions. "You claimed there were signs of intoxication. The footage shows her lucid, articulate, and without any physical signs of impairment. You also didn't administer any test, nor was there a technical justification for the initial stop. All of this is documented." Kevin tried to gather himself. "It was a field judgment. I had a feeling something was off. Sergeant, a feeling is not a legal basis, especially when it results in a de facto detention, even without a formal arrest, and particularly when there is clear inequality in how the individual was treated." Silence. Jeanette flipped through the report with the tip of her finger. "The informal shield that has protected many officers for years does not cover arbitrary actions. And when the target has knowledge and a voice, that shield cracks. That's what happened here." Kevin lowered his eyes. Not out of respect, out of fear. "You'll have a chance to present your defense, of course. But the process is moving forward. Internal Affairs will notify the command staff and the district attorney's office. Your name is on the radar now, Sergeant." He nodded silently. Leaving the room, Jeanette's words still echoed in his mind. The shield cracked. In the hallway, a young officer passed by and gave him a look he couldn't quite read. It wasn't contempt, it was disappointment, as if he'd lost something invisible, but important, and he had. The silent trust of the system. Vivian Banks walked through the halls of the central courthouse with her usual calm, but that day, each step carried more weight than usual. It wasn't uncertainty, it was an awareness of what was at stake. The complaint against Sergeant Kevin Bernard had moved beyond the shadows and was now circulating through internal judicial networks, legal groups, and quietly, among fellow judges. Still not public, but already resonating where it mattered, with those who read signals before the media catches on. In the meeting room of the Second Civil Court, Vivian sat with two colleagues, Judge Matthias Prado and retired appellate judge Clarice Antunes. The coffee was lukewarm, the conversation precise. "Do you realize what this represents?" Matthias asked, leaning on the table. "You didn't just file a complaint, Vivian. You documented it coldly. You made the abuse undeniable. Vivian took a deep breath before answering. I did what any informed citizen would do. The difference is, I have a place to be heard. Exactly, Clarice nodded. That's what makes it symbolic. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't force anything. You just recorded. And even then, he reacted like he had absolute power. Because until now he did, Vivian added calmly. The three sat in silence for a few seconds. That same morning, the unedited footage of the stop had already reached the president of the state Supreme Court and the State Bar Association's ombudsman. Protocol required discretion, but the name Bernard was now being murmured uneasily in police hallways. Vivian knew it, and she also knew what came next: institutional resistance, the reflexive self-defense of systems when forced to face their own errors. But what she also knew, and many forgot, was that she wasn't alone. At the end of her day, she received a sealed envelope on her desk. No visible sender, only a handwritten note, personal and confidential. She opened it calmly. It was a printed letter, hand-signed, from a national collective of black women judges titled, "In support of our colleague Vivian Banks, for her ethical and courageous stand against injustice." One section read, "In times when authority is mistaken for dominance and uniforms are used as shields for impunity, your act speaks for us. You did not remain silent. You did not stand aside. And in doing so, you made visible what so often remains invisible." She closed her eyes for a moment, not out of relief, out of connection. Her phone vibrated. A voice message from her sister, Renata, a criminal defense attorney in another city. "Vivi, I saw it. It's starting to circulate here. I just wanted to say, I'm with you. What you're doing, it's huge. And I know you didn't want attention, but you did the right thing. I'm with you all the way." Vivian smiled, briefly, quietly. Shortly after, a calendar notification popped up, preliminary hearing scheduled. In 3 weeks, she would stand before a judge, not as a magistrate, but as the plaintiff in a civil suit for abuse of authority and violation of constitutional rights. And she would be there, robed or not, because dignity, in the end, isn't in the attire. It's in what you stand for. That night, while Kevin Bernard shut himself inside his home, TV blaring to drown out his anxiety, Vivian was reviewing the timeline of events line by line, not preparing for a fight, but for a necessary exposure. She knew he would try to defend himself, knew there would be claims of excess caution, that they'd try to frame the stop as a technical error, not abuse. But she also knew what she held: the video, the record, the credibility, and above all, the truth, meticulously backed by evidence. At its core, this wasn't just about her. It was about breaking the false sense of immunity many like Kevin had carried for years. The shield was no longer absolute. It had visible cracks, and now the system had a choice to make: reform or collapse with it. Room 203 of the Central Courthouse was more crowded than usual that Tuesday morning. No press, yet. But something in the air signaled that this trial was different. Seated in the back were courthouse staff, a few prosecutors, 2 internal affairs officers, even a public defender not assigned to the case who had asked permission to attend. Everyone wanted to witness it. Vivian Banks entered at precisely 9:12 a.m., accompanied by her attorney, Dr. Isadora Lima, a woman with a calm voice and a firm gaze. Vivian was dressed with discretion, dark blazer, hair tied back, upright posture. She wasn't wearing a robe, not here. In that space, she was the plaintiff, the victim, a citizen, and yet, still a judge. The low murmur of conversation ceased the moment she crossed the threshold, not out of fear, out of respect. Across the room, Kevin Bernard was already seated, face serious, suit slightly ill-fitting. Next to him, defense attorney Dr. Cesar Alencar shuffled folders with the urgency of a man trying to assert control over a narrative slipping through his fingers. When Kevin's eyes met Vivian's, he looked away. There was no defiance, no empathy, just discomfort. At 9:30 a.m., the presiding judge, Dr. Miriam Antunes, entered, and everyone stood. Vivian knew Miriam well, a colleague from law school, methodical, unshakable under pressure. If anyone could handle that trial with rigor, it was her. Be seated. We are beginning the preliminary hearing for case number 2024-0417. Plaintiff, Vivian Banks. Defendant, Kevin Bernard. The footage began, large screen, clean audio. Vivian sweaty, tired inside the car. Calm voice, polite. Kevin visibly impatient, aggressive stance. Flashlight in her face, hand on his holster. Sharp tone, refusal to explain the stop. Then came backup, the tow truck, the end. No dramatic reactions, just a collective weight settling over the courtroom. The raw truth, documented. "Dr. Isadora," said the judge after the video ended, "you may proceed." "Your Honor, the plaintiff isn't offering a subjective interpretation. She presents facts, documented facts. An unjustified stop with no technical basis, conducted abusively, and the aggravating element, the victim is a black woman, a jurist, who responded with complete civility. And still she was treated as a dangerous suspect. The defense's argument that he didn't know who she was doesn't protect the defendant. It only exposes the pattern in how he treats those he doesn't deem worthy of respect." Kevin shifted in his seat, crossed his arms. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. The judge then turned to Vivian. "Ms. Banks, would you like to make a statement?" She nodded, stood calmly, no papers in hand, just herself and the truth she carried. "Your Honor, on the night of April 17th, I was stopped without legal justification. I cooperated, I identified myself verbally, I explained the temporary absence of my license. Even so, I was treated as a suspect, intimidated, and threatened with detention. My vehicle was towed. All of this under the authority of an officer who, from the beginning, seemed more intent on exerting power than enforcing the law." She paused briefly. "I'm not here because I'm a judge. I'm here in spite of that, because I know what happens when someone without a voice goes through something similar, and in good conscience I can't ignore it." The silence that followed was different, not discomfort, collective reflection. Vivian sat down. The room breathed with her. Across the aisle, Kevin seemed smaller by the second, not physically, in demeanor. The emotional armor of years cracking, fragment by fragment. Judge Miriam made a note, looked up and declared, "The defendant will be heard in the next session. This hearing will resume with testimony and cross-examinations. For now, the case proceeds through standard evidence and instruction phases. This court is watching impartially." She tapped the gavel lightly. Adjourned. As Vivian left the room, she didn't seek eye contact, didn't look for support. She simply walked, carrying the same firm posture with which she had entered. And behind her came a shift in the air, not just in the justice system, in how authority would be seen from now on. 2 days later, the courtroom was filled again. Less crowded than at the first hearing, but the eyes that remained were sharper. The mood was heavier now. No longer curiosity, expectation. Kevin Bernard entered through the side door, pressured, but trying to maintain composure. His suit was better tailored, his hair trimmed, but his eyes still searched for an exit. On the other side, Vivian sat with her attorney, expression neutral, neither confrontational nor judgmental, just present. And for Kevin, that was the most unbearable thing of all. Judge Miriam Antunes began the session without delay. "We will now continue the hearing for case 2024-0417. Defendant, Kevin Bernard. This phase will consist of the defendant's testimony and witness statements. Mr. Bernard, are you ready?" He nodded, his voice tighter than expected. "Yes, Your Honor." He took the witness seat, adjusted the mic, cleared his throat. "Mr. Bernard," began the judge, "describe in your own words the stop conducted on the night of April 17th. "I was on patrol near Washington Street, around 9:45 p.m. I noticed a vehicle slightly veering between lanes and decided to stop it as a precaution. The driver had no documents on hand, so I requested backup and proceeded according to protocol." The voice was steady, rehearsed. The judge responded with surgical neutrality. "And did the woman in question at any point act hostile, aggressive, or pose a physical threat to you?" Kevin hesitated, briefly, almost imperceptibly. No, but she was evasive, tried to prevent me from conducting the stop as intended. Evasive how? Recording with her phone, questioning commands, trying to assert herself. Assert herself? He realized. Too late. The judge made a note. Next came the prosecuting attorney, a young, direct man. Sergeant Bernard, you claim the vehicle was stopped due to slight lane deviation. In your service record, there are over 200 stops under that same pretext. I couldn't say the exact number. Interesting. In none of them is there a record of a vehicle being towed solely for lack of documentation without additional violations. Why was this one different? Unusual situation, circumstantial. You stated in your report there were signs of possible intoxication. Did you observe bottles, breath, erratic behavior? Not directly, but fatigue, sweat, lack of ID. The prosecutor cut in, fatigue, sweat. She said she came from the gym. And that's an indicator of intoxication, Sergeant. Kevin went silent. The prosecutor continued. Did you know the driver was a judge? No. And if you had? Kevin looked at Vivian. And for the first time, something in his expression felt closer to real. Exposed. Vulnerable. Probably. Would have acted more carefully. More carefully? Would have been more direct. More respectful. That sentence hit the courtroom like a silent thunderclap. The prosecutor walked back to his table and concluded, Thank you. No further questions. The defense may continue the charade if it wishes. The judge intervened gently. No irony, counselor. Keep to the facts. Kevin's lawyer stood, cleaned his glasses with a cloth, and approached the stand. Sergeant, do you have a disciplinary record? No, sir. Have you ever been formally accused of abusive conduct? No formal accusations. So what occurred was a misunderstanding, correct? Kevin hesitated. I wouldn't call it a misunderstanding. Maybe a misjudgment, an excess of caution, which any professional might experience, correct? He nodded, relieved. But Judge Miriam looked up. But a repeated misjudgment against specific social profiles, Sergeant, ceases to be an error and becomes a pattern. Would you agree? He didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence answered for him. The hearing ended shortly after, with the judge committing to issue a ruling within 5 business days. On paper, the verdict had not yet been delivered, but for many in the room, including Kevin, it had already been read in the eyes of everyone present. As she left, Vivian didn't look back. Not out of disdain, but because there was nothing left in that defendant's chair that could shake her. Her part was done. Now it was time for justice to do hers. The second-floor hallway of the central courthouse was silent, as if holding its breath. No journalists, no flashes, just the muffled sound of formal footsteps and distant doors closing. Vivian Banks entered the courtroom with the same composure she had carried throughout the entire process. Calm, steady, unadorned. She wore a neutral outfit, a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled into a discreet bun. At her side, attorney Isadora Lima wore an expression that blended certainty with surgical focus. Across the room, Kevin Bernard waited, noticeably thinner, paler, and infinitely quieter than in the earlier sessions. Beside him, his attorney sorted through papers without conviction. The rhetoric had dried up. Only the record remained. At the front, Judge Miriam Antunes sat with the poise of someone who understood the weight she carried, not just legal, but symbolic. She opened the case file. The verdict will be read in this hearing, as scheduled. The room adjusted itself. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. This is a civil case filed by Vivian Banks, citizen and magistrate, against the defendant Kevin Bernard, police officer, for an unlawful stop, abuse of authority, and conduct incompatible with legal and constitutional protocols while in public service. She turned a page. Upon detailed analysis of the documentary, testimonial and audio-visual evidence, this court finds that the stop endured by the plaintiff had no legal or technical basis and lacked objective criteria. It was conducted on subjective perception, contaminated by personal bias. Kevin pressed his lips together. No visible reaction. But his lawyer sighed. The court further finds that the defendant's behavior during the stop was marked by unnecessary verbal escalation, intimidation, and a lack of reasonableness. The absence of physical aggression does not negate the emotional and symbolic impact caused. Judge Miriam looked up at the courtroom. Accordingly, this court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Vivian Banks, and finds that a violation of constitutional rights did occur during the officer's exercise of authority. Utter silence, but in many hearts, a thunderclap. Moral damages are set at $50,000. The amount is symbolic in comparison to the institutional harm done and will be permanently recorded in the defendant's professional file. Kevin lowered his head for the first time. This decision will be forwarded to the District Attorney's Office, the Office of Internal Affairs, and the Command of the Police Department for conduct review, protocol reassessment, and possible disciplinary or criminal proceedings. Judge Antunes closed the file. This court hereby concludes this hearing and publishes the ruling as a legal precedent for cases involving abuse of authority in public service. Court is adjourned. She struck the gavel. Vivian didn't smile, didn't sigh, didn't raise a fist. She simply closed her eyes for a second, a moment of contained humanity. When they opened again, her eyes were steady, ready for what came next, because she knew the verdict was just a milestone. The real work would come after. Kevin left the courtroom with his head down, surrounded by colleagues who avoided eye contact. He was no longer the confident, untouchable cop. He was a man exposed. His uniform no longer conferred power, only weight. Outside on the courthouse steps, the soft afternoon wind scattered dry leaves. Vivian descended slowly, feeling the ground under her feet with a different sense of presence. Her phone buzzed. A simple notification. Verdict published. Case closed. Isadora walked beside her in silence. "You could have asked for more," she said, glancing sideways. Vivian answered without hesitation. "It was never about money. You think this will change anything?" She paused on the sidewalk, looked at the overcast sky. "I don't know," then turned finally to her lawyer. "But maybe next time he'll think twice." And that, to her, was already a beginning. At the 14th Police Precinct in Toledo, Ohio, silence spoke louder than any official memo. Kevin Bernard's name was everywhere, in internal emails, conduct reports, and hushed whispers down the halls. The court ruling had landed like a silent bomb. Not because it was unexpected, but because this time, someone had gone all the way. And won. When Kevin entered the break room, the atmosphere froze. No one commented. No one made eye contact for long. Some stood up before he could sit. On his desk was an envelope from the Office of Internal Affairs. The cover, stamped in red, "Notice of administrative leave. Effective immediately. For an indefinite period, until the internal review was completed and a new assessment determined whether he would remain on the force." Inside was a simple form, employee response to disciplinary action. He knew it was bureaucratic formality. The damage from the court's verdict had already outpaced anything an internal process could contain. Kevin sat, staring at the opened envelope. In the last 15 years, he had never been successfully challenged. Now his authority was cracked, and the crack was public. There were no handcuffs, no jail cell, but the weight was the same. Meanwhile, at the Lucas County Civil Court, Vivian Banks returned to her routine without ceremony. Same pens, same stack of case files, same poise. The verdict had quietly rippled through Ohio's legal system. The response wasn't explosive, but it was strategic. Judges, prosecutors, defenders, and law enforcement leaders understood exactly what it represented. Vivian, however, gave no speeches, used no social media, didn't respond to the dozens of interview requests flooding her inbox since the final hearing. Her focus was elsewhere. That afternoon, her assistant entered the chambers carrying a formal envelope from the Ohio Judicial Ethics Board. "It's from the Judicial Conduct Commission, subject, recognition for institutional integrity." Vivian opened the envelope naturally. The letter was straightforward. Your conduct during and after the incident involving the Toledo Police Department will be incorporated into training programs for judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officers. Your stance demonstrated that firmness requires no force, only conviction and courage. She read it to the end, folded it carefully, filed it in silence. Later that evening at home, her phone rang, an institutional number. Judge Banks. This is Lieutenant Colonel Brian Elliott from the Academy Training Division. We're updating our cadet training curriculum and would like to invite you to lead a session on accountability and ethical conduct in routine stops. Vivian answered without hesitation. I'd be honored. A brief pause on the other end. Thank you, Judge. This will make a difference. She ended the call, then opened her laptop and began typing the key points for the session. The following week, she stepped onto a stage at the Academy Center Auditorium, facing over 100 newly minted police cadets. Young men and women, crisp uniforms, attentive eyes. Vivian wore a dark suit, nothing flashy, but her presence filled the room more than any badge could. Good afternoon, she began, her voice firm. Today I'm not here as a judge. I'm here as a citizen, as someone who lived the weight of a misjudgment and chose not to stay silent. The cadets listened intently. The badge you wear is not a license to act without thinking. It is a pact with the public, a commitment to fairness. And when you abuse that power, it's not just the individual who suffers, it's the public trust. She paced slowly across the stage. When I was stopped that night, I was tired, sweaty, without ID. All I did was cooperate. And still, I was treated as a suspect. Why? She let the question hang in the air. Because for many, respect still depends on appearance, on status, on submission. But not for me. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with documentation, and I let the truth speak. In the back of the room, one academy instructor crossed his arms, visibly moved. Vivian closed. The uniform you wear is a tool, but your character determines how it's used. And if you can't carry power with responsibility, then maybe you're not ready to carry power at all. Absolute silence. But it wasn't the silence of doubt. It was the silence of impact. 2 days later, a video of the lecture was circulating in internal groups among police, prosecutors, and federal agents. No slogans, no dramatics, just a hard truth, spoken calmly and impossible to ignore. The auditorium of the Ohio State Leadership Academy was packed, yet silent. The kind of silence that precedes something important, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Before an audience of about 150 recruits recently admitted to the Federal Justice and Public Safety Training Program, including future FBI agents, assistant prosecutors, state troopers, and legal analysts, Vivian Banks walked calmly to the center of the stage. She wasn't introduced with fanfare, just by name and title, Honorable Judge Vivian Banks, Lucas County Civil Court. But everyone knew who she was. She took her place at the podium, looked out over the crowd for a second, and without using the fixed microphone, pulled a small remote from her pocket and turned off the screen displaying institutional slides. Today, I'm not going to talk about case law or legal precedent. Her voice was clear without effort. I want to talk about something that comes before the law, something you don't learn in books. She took a step to the side. Character. The word echoed. You're here because you chose to serve, but service doesn't mean command, it means carrying weight, and that weight is called responsibility. Vivian paused. No one moved. A few months ago, I was pulled over on a quiet street in the city where I've served for over 20 years. I was coming back from the gym, sweaty, no ID, in plain clothes. And in that moment, in the eyes of the officer who stopped me, I was no one. She walked slowly across the stage, without a script. I could have yelled. I could have demanded recognition, but I did none of that. I documented, I reported, I went to court like any other citizen. The screen behind her lit up briefly with a simple phrase in white. Power doesn't require volume. It requires integrity. She continued. The officer who stopped me believed the badge made him untouchable, that the absence of resistance was submission. He was wrong twice. First, for failing to recognize a human being in front of him. Second, for not understanding that authority without responsibility isn't strength, it's a threat. In the audience, some cadets scribbled frantically. Most simply watched, transfixed by the steady cadence of someone not speaking to be admired, but to leave a warning. Vivian returned to the center of the stage. If you think a uniform, a rank, or a title will earn you automatic respect, you're in the wrong place. Respect isn't given, it's proven. Every day. And if you ever forget that, someone will remind you. She pulled the remote again and the screen changed to an image of a justice scale. One side weighed a badge, the other a constitution. This is the balance you will carry, whether you like it or not. If the weight tips toward ego, haste, or arrogance, you won't be leaders. You'll be a danger to those you're sworn to protect. Silence. Then came the final line. The uniform you'll wear is not a shield. It's a commitment. And I hope, truly hope, that none of you have to learn that the way that officer did. She didn't wait for applause. She left the stage with the same calm she had entered. No one in the audience moved for several seconds. It was the kind of stillness that happens only when a truth settles in. The lecture had ended, but its effect lingered in the auditorium like an invisible current. No thunderous applause, no euphoria. Just the kind of silence that comes when something irreversible has been recognized. Vivian Banks walked alone to the backstage area. No team awaited her, no press officer, no photographer, just the exit door, a table with bottled water, and a wall mirror. She stopped in front of it and adjusted her hair. Not for vanity, for dignity. Minutes later, outside the auditorium, she crossed the building's parking lot in silence. One of the academy instructors, a gray-haired man, caught up to her, slightly out of breath. "Judge Banks?" he called, with the kind of formality that comes not from protocol, but from respect. She stopped and turned, the afternoon sun tracing her silhouette. "Yes, I just wanted to say thank you. I think a lot of them needed to hear that. Maybe more than they'd admit." She nodded with a faint smile. "It's a start. Do you really think this will change anything?" Vivian looked toward the horizon before answering. "I believe that every person who hears and doesn't look away has already changed a little. Sometimes change starts like that, with discomfort, with unease, with silence." He thanked her again and said goodbye. She got into her car alone. The seat still held the heat of the afternoon sun. The steering wheel was warm to the touch, but she took a deep breath and drove, without hurry, without music, just the road. The following week, the Bernard case verdict was added to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division's database as a precedent for racially biased police stops and improper conduct. No press release, no headlines. But the reference was there for every lawyer, defender, instructor, and judge who, from then on, searched for a real documented case with clear implications. At the precinct, Kevin Bernard now occupied a small administrative cubicle, assigned to low-priority report reviews, far from the streets, far from authority in the field. His uniform still hung in his locker, not out of honor, but because no one had yet told him to take it down. Colleagues treated him cautiously, but not kindly. It was the kind of silence that isolates, the same silence that precedes the end. On Friday, he received a final notice from the department. "Your conduct is under review for potential permanent removal from field duty. The case remains under disciplinary evaluation by the Board of Officer Standards." Kevin didn't contest it, didn't call a lawyer. For the first time, he understood that the system that had shielded him for so long was now watching. Meanwhile, Vivian kept working, signing rulings, attending hearings, preparing reports on judicial protocol reform and civilian police interactions. She declined interviews, declined invitations to talk shows, declined a documentary series offer from a streaming platform. "This isn't a story about me," she responded. "It's about what we allow to continue and what we decide to confront." 2 months later, she stood once again before a group, this time a small cohort of new interns at the district court. Young, diverse, attentive. She observed them for a moment before speaking. I want to begin with a simple question. How many of you believe that the position you aim to hold comes with built-in respect? A few hands rose timidly. Vivian didn't judge. She just smiled with patience. I understand. The idea that a robe, a badge, a courtroom desk gives us automatic authority and is common. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. The position doesn't protect you. It only amplifies you. A heavy silence spread. It amplifies your ethics, your preparation. But it also amplifies your biases, your impatience, your arrogance. And when someone gets hurt because of that, the impact is greater because people expected more from you and because you should know better. She paused, walked to the front of the room. I was stopped on a quiet street in calm traffic by someone who thought he could classify me in seconds. And even when I cooperated, he decided I didn't deserve respect because he didn't recognize me, because I didn't raise my voice, because I looked like any ordinary woman. And for him, that was enough to make me suspicious. All eyes were fixed on her. But I'm a judge. And that day, I was just a citizen. And that was enough. Because the system must work, even when we don't know who's on the other side. She returned to her seat. Her final words came gently, almost like a whisper spoken aloud. Don't rely on your position to justify your conduct. Rely on what you choose to do when no one's watching. That is what will define who you are. Later, as she exited through the side door of the building, she saw a young court employee holding the door for her, one of the interns, shy, steady gaze. "Judge Banks?" she asked respectfully. "Yes? Thank you for today. And thank you for not letting it slide." Vivian smiled, genuine but brief. "I was once the only one in the room who felt out of place, and I promised that if I ever could, I'd leave the door open.